Welcome to Commander Central, episode 317, and today we are going to talk a little bit about some overlooked commanders that are showing up in less than 100 decks in EDH Rec. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Boys, welcome back. How's everybody doing today?
Peachy.
It's hot.
It is hot. It's hot and muggy out. That's right.
Like 2 weeks ago, it was 60 degrees, and now it's 90 degrees.
It's colder than that. It was like in the 40s 2 weeks ago. Now it's in the 90s.
I warned everyone this was going to happen, and no one believed
how it goes.
me.
You did.
I'll take it over the cold winter, man.
Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
It's nice in my basement, though. I'm like perfect down here. I'm like, yeah.
I'm in the basement too. It's like just fine down here. That's where I'm at as well. Max, are you still in the Dungeon of Doom in the basement, or are you recording upstairs?
I still am in the Dungeon of Doom.
So it's probably nice down there too.
It is.
So all right, hey, we're escaping the heat. We're recording a podcast. All three of us are back on. That's a pretty good start to our recording Thursday.
Yes, indeed.
And I did not get to play this week. Max didn't really, but Chris got to play last weekend in a modern tournament that didn't go great because your deck was not your deck was not on your side, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I did the last 4 modern tournaments. I top 8'd, and then this one I went 0-3 and dropped. Playing the same deck, I was just like, guess karma's just comes for me every once in a while.
I hear you. What decks wound up really excelling in the tournament?
It was pretty much the same stuff from what I saw. Your Rhinos deck, your the Voltron deck. I can't even think of the name of it. Hammer Time.
Hammer Time, sure.
I think those were the 2 big decks that I could think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there was a control deck of some sort because I saw a lot of people playing that. I didn't really stick around to see what the top 8 was, so...
I think they had 100 people, 99 people, something like that?
99 people. My guess was going to be 96 people, and we hit the 99 mark, so I was pretty close. But, it's like the Price is Right. If you go over, you go over. It doesn't matter.
Right, there we go.
I have a question, since
Yes.
I am so unfamiliar with modern. Rhino's deck, as in like Siege Rhino?
As in Crashing Footfalls.
Oh, okay. I was totally off. There we go.
You cast... not Blighted Agent, but Shardless Agent and Violent Outburst to cascade into Crashing Footfalls to cast it for free.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And then you make the tokens.
Yep, make 2 4/4s with Trample. Like, who in their right mind is like, oh, well, let's just give them Trample, and let's put Shardless Agent, in the next set so they can just cast it for free.
That's ridiculous. Well, they had a good turnout there. Artist RK Post was present. I got a signed Thought Vessel, and I bought a couple of tokens, including one of his Metal Monarch tokens. So
yeah,
that was kind of cool.
He just debuted his new Monarch token when he was at our store too. That was the new one. He
and you guys had some pretty good food. It was actually a pretty nice event. Was it the 5-year anniversary of the shop?
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah, because I think the actual 5-year was, I think it's in September or something like that. But our store owners, they're getting married in October, and
there's a baby on the way.
There's a baby in July, and so
Yeah.
they scheduled it all sooner rather than later. So
yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, it was a very cool event. It was neat to walk through for that, and hopefully I will be at the shop this week and get some games in as well, and I can talk about that because it's been a little while for me. Aside from playing on stream, I haven't got to play games in person in I don't know 3 or 4 weeks now.
Right,
which was like 4 sets ago.
Should be good. I know I'm going on the 21st. I'm actually doing a tournament in Minneapolis.
Nice.
Nerd Rage gaming scene. So we'll see how that goes.
Very cool. And Max and I will both be at the Command Fest Vegas as well in the second week in July or June, I believe.
Yes.
That is the plan. And I am also going to be going to the Command Fests in Virginia, Richmond, and which is the week before Vegas, and in Indianapolis, which is I think second week in July, I believe.
Correct.
I have a couple on my schedule, and I want to bet we'll get some announced for the fall at some point too. So if there's anything local, we'll try to hit. If there's a Minneapolis or Madison, Milwaukee, whatever, we'll make an attempt to go to those as well. All right. Well, hey, if you out there in listener land want to reach out to us, talk about your plans for summer, where you're playing Magic, and what's going on in your life, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central, and you can also find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/cmdrcentral. Check out our reward tiers, such as joining our community to chat and play virtual EDH with everybody.
And we appreciate any support anyone can give us, whether it's listening to the show or supporting us on Patreon or just liking and upvoting. It all means a lot, so thanks to everyone who listens to the show. We appreciate it. I will throw out an errata last week. Chris and I did our show talking about cards at each CMC, And I think at the 4 spot is where Repeated Reverberations is, and I mentioned it. I've had that card, I don't think I run it in a deck. I've had it cast against me, I don't know, 4 or 5 times in the last year, last 6 months probably. And every person who's cast it against me has done it with a before the end of the turn, I'm going to cast this, and then next turn cast a spell. I'm guessing that's because the text is kind of worded in an odd way where it says this turn is buried after how it's worded. You can't cast it that way. I mentioned it on the show last week as that being the upside of that card. It doesn't work that way. It does say until end of turn, but the text is kind of worded in an oddball way that clearly every person who's used it against me has missed that as well, because I don't think I've ever seen it cast on the turn where the then spells are cast. So that was something that I missed because every person who's used it against me has clearly missed it. So anyway, throwing that out there about Repeated Reverberations.
I also have an errata from last week.
Oh, what's that?
Chris, you read Lear, the Lear Disciple of the Drowned.
Yep.
You read the arena version of the card, I believe, was the feedback.
Oh.
Because they made that alchemy version where the paper version, it says spells can't be countered.
Better. It's even better. I looked it up. It's even better than the arena version. It's pretty dumb.
Card's ridiculous.
Yeah.
All right. So see, that's why we can't let Max not be on the show. He's keeps
what
on
are you
flying
do
on the
next
straight and
week?
narrow.
That's
true. You're gone
next week. I'm in Florida next week.
Well, you in Florida, what can possibly go wrong?
I mean, I'm only like 5 minutes away from Disney World, so...
That's where you just ditch your meetings and go to Disney?
Can't afford Disney right now, but I wish I could.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, well, let's jump into the main topic here. We were going to talk about some commanders that are very, very underplayed, and by underplayed, we're saying there's less than 100 decks for these in EDH Rec. So we're talking about like why we think they're actually interesting and worth considering. And Max, since you're gone next week, we're going to start with you. What's your first commander you want to talk about that's you think is interesting, that's underplayed, and why do you think it's an interesting commander?
My first is going to be Daragaz the Igniter.
Is this the reprinted Daragaz or the original Daragaz?
I believe this is the original from Invasion.
Yep, okay.
So it is 3 and Jund for a 6/6 dragon legend. It has flying, and then like all the Invasion dragons, it has an ability. So this one says, whenever Daragaz deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 and a red. And if you do, choose a color. Then that player reveals their hand, and Daragaz deals damage to the player equal to the number of cards of the color revealed that way. I can totally see how this was great in like a 1v1 format way back in the day. You only have one person to worry about. But I also think in Commander, you can probably make this work really well because you're in colors that have the group draw ability. So you can run stuff like Fate Unraveler, the artifact that lets Howling Mind, along with like Spiteful Vision. So you can already have cards that fuel your opponent's hand. And then since you're in red, go extra combat steps or double strike. So every time you hit your opponent, you get to see that hand over and over again. And hey, if that first combat, you whiffed and they just had a bunch of lands in their hand or something, hit someone else and then hit them with double strikes. You get as many attempts to look at that player's hand and, hit them for that much more damage every turn. So I swing at you, Dana. I pay the 2 and a red, and I say green, and you end up having all lands. Well, then I'm going to cast like Relentless Assault, and I'm going to go swing at Chris instead.
Gotcha.
And, pay 2 and a red again. So you need the mana, but there are plenty of cards, especially recently, there's like that new dragon that whenever a flying creature you control attacks, add mana to your mana pool. Mm-hmm. Run that in here as well. So you can just, every time your flyers attack, you can, boom, have all this mana to put into Daragaz's ability.
Well, and you're also in colors that have access to things like Gratuitous Violence and things like Wound Reflection. So like Daragaz is hitting for 6, you pay the 2 and ding somebody for an additional 3 or 4 based on the colors of the cards in their hand, and then they're going to take between the Daragaz damage and the damage from the ability, they're taking twice as much functionally. And then if you happen to, like you said, have a double strike or something in there, or a damage doubler, which is a green and red thing as well, like the Unleash Fury or whatever, those kind of effects, Berserk, whatever, very easily can turn into a one-shot machine.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's a lot of things like, can you maybe do that a little bit easier with Korvold? Sure, but the deck sets up differently too. Like you play a lot of different spells in a Korvold deck versus what you do in a Daragaz deck. You are in Jund, there's a lot of good competition here, but no, Daragaz is one of those cards I think has kind of has been forgotten about in recent years.
And I forgot to mention this. This only has 69 decks made on EDH Rec.
Nice. And hasn't had a reprint in forever. I think that there was a dual deck Phyrexia versus the Coalition, which is like 10 years ago now, I think, if not longer than that.
Yep.
And Invasion was a previous printing. So yeah, it hasn't had a reprint in forever. So yeah, people have just probably don't know this card even exists. If it wasn't for the fact that we got the new version of it, I mean, this was just a forgotten card for sure. Chris, what's your first one here?
All right, my first one is going to be God Eternal Ronus. This card is in 65 decks on EDH Rec. For those of you that don't know, God Eternal Ronus is a 5/5 legendary creature zombie god for 5 mana, 3 colorless, and double green. God Eternal Ronus has Death Touch. Also has the ability that when it enters the battlefield, double power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain Vigilance until end of turn as well. And then God Eternal Ronus has what all the other God Eternals have, that when they die, you can choose to put it in at the third from the top in your deck. I really like this card a lot, and I'm surprised I don't see it played more, because it is pretty much a Craterhoof on a stick. While granted it doesn't give trample, most green creatures have trample to begin with. So the ability to just cast it out of the command zone to double all your creatures' powers is, I think that's just useful in general. I see a lot of green decks that are playing, it's just generic commander or whatever, just because they're just playing, a generic big stompy deck. Why not play something like this in the helm that you just always have that? Because then you don't have to worry about the RNG of drawing Craterhoof or the tutoring of Craterhoof or anything like that to get that to go. You just have it right there on the stick. Worst case scenario, you can put it back in your deck too, which is also super risky to do because there are a lot of shuffle effects, but it could pay off because, in my opinion, green has the second best card draw in the game, so you're going to end up drawing it before it gets shuffled back in.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of those cards too, where like it's a little bit tricky because to what you could really do with it, but if you had access to other colors and you don't in green, is ways to like play it and then like make a clone of it, and the clone dies, but it doesn't matter. The clone ETBs, which is enough to double the other power of creatures you control, and then blink it or something, you know. Like chain off 2 or 3 of those in a single turn and like double and double and double and double your creatures. Green, that's way more difficult to do. There's artifacts that do things, but it's much trickier than it is normally. But yeah, this is like a, you play this, and Panharmonicon definitely works here. Play this Panharmonicon. There's ways you can kind of do that in green, but it's just a really, really strong card. It being a 5/5 with Death Touch for 5 mana is pretty solid all on its own, let alone the fact that it's going to turn all your creatures into giant stompy beasts.
Yeah, and it doesn't have the God clause of needing, X amount of things to be able to do anything. It's just, it is a 5/5 with Death Touch immediately. So, I mean, I am super surprised that there's only 65 decks. My guess is, and I'm going to prereq this for all of these cards that we're going to discuss, is that, there's probably thousands of these decks that were made, but there's a lot of people that just don't use online resources at all. So you can't figure that out. So, I mean, these numbers,
especially the ones that are less obvious, like if people that are playing really powerful stuff that tend to be more like tuned in, and which means they're probably building decks online. People that are building like these more obscure commanders probably then themselves are also like not as into the scene to the point where they're putting their deck on Architect or Moxfield or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's true. I am curious. Like, I was trying to figure out how many decks this card's actually in itself, just the card. And I'm sure it's a lot because of just how powerful it's just. It's literally just another type of Craterhoof card that you can put in a deck.
Yeah, as a commander, it's not in many, but like as it's a very good card in decks for sure.
Yes.
All right, my first pick here would be Dromoka the Eternal, not Max's favorite Dromoka, but Dromoka the Eternal.
It's still a really good card.
It's still a great card.
5 mana, 3 in Selesnya, 5/5, has flying, and whenever a dragon you control attacks, bolster 2. So you choose a creature with the least toughness among creatures you control and put 2+1 counters on it. Now you can use it for some kind of a go wide strategy, but the important thing to note here is it's whenever a dragon, not just whenever Dromoka attacks. There's a really, really limited amount of dragons in green and white.
One of the best dragons is green, though.
Yeah, and between, there's a few changelings too. You could put together kind of a dragon tribal deck. The one wonky thing, because I have taken apart my Selesnya Enchantress deck, and that was kind of what inspired this show topic, was I was looking through relatively underplayed Selesnya commanders to see if anything like popped up for me for an idea. And the Dragon Tribal thing didn't really work because I have a Dimir Dragon Tribal deck, and I didn't want a Selesnya one as well. I don't need to be walking uphill both ways with both of my Dragon decks. That doesn't seem like a good time. But what I did think would be kind of an interesting way to play this would be to play it as a kind of a creatureless Voltron deck, because if you have no other creatures, the 2+1 counters are forced to go on Dramoka, which means every time you attack, she gets 2 counters put on her. And you're in green, so you have access to, the doubling seasons and the branching evolutions of the world that double the amount of counters that get put onto things. And you have access to hardened scales. And there's things like Fractal Harness that is an equipment that doubles counters. And there's multiple different like instant or sorcery one-shot effects that double counters. So this is a deck where it would, I think, be really interesting to turn a Dramoka into a Voltron +1 counters commander that's really the only creature in the deck. Now, you'd be vulnerable to edict kind of effects if someone tries to force you to sacrifice stuff, but there's some ways around that. There's things that give you hexproof, so you can't be forced to sacrifice stuff with targeted effects. And if you're worried about like the flesh bag marauder kind of effects of the world, there's also more than a few green and white instant speed spells that make tokens. So if you were really worried about that, you could also just put a few of those spells in your deck and just occasionally leave a couple mana up for the chance to, okay, someone casts a Fleshbag Marauder, instant speed make a 1/1 token and sacrifice that to the Marauder versus your Dramoka. So I don't think it would be an amazing deck, but I think it would be weird and interesting and maybe not one that you would very frequently see anyone doing anything like that with this deck.
I think if that deck were to see play like a lot more, and I'm assuming a lot of the decks that are built that way, they're probably bolster decks or whatever the ability is, because I think it's a majority of it's in white and green anyways, if I remember correctly from cons. So, I mean, that would just, you're just spitting counters out on the creature with the least toughness. So, I mean, just pumping everything up as you go.
Yep. So I think I actually might try to see if I can turn my Sigarda deck into that deck. I'm still theory crafting, but I think I'm gonna make an attempt to do that with this Dramoka. So that's my first pick. Max, let's jump back to you here. What's your second interesting, heavily underplayed commander that you kind of liked?
My next one is Yamiji, who bars the way.
This sounds like a Kamigawa card.
It is a Kamigawa card. It is from Betrayers, and it only has 44 decks made around it. Legendary Spirit costs 7 mana, 5 and 2 white for a 4/4. And it says, whenever a legendary permanent other than Yomiji, who bars the way, is put into a graveyard from play, return that card to its owner's hand. I kind of looked at this and was like, geez, it's kind of like Dana's Dejaru Planeswalker deck, because it cares about legendary permanents to a degree. His is more Planeswalkers, but there's tons of things. This is any legendary permanent, so that means your mana rocks, your creatures, your Planeswalkers, your lands. So when someone blows up your Nykthos, if Yomiji's out, it just goes back to your hand.
Yeah.
Granted, this is somewhat of a group hug-esque effect because it hits everybody, not just you. So if you blow up someone's commander, that just goes back to their hand as well.
I think that'd be fine, though. I mean, if you build it around all legendaries, your value is much higher than theirs. So you're giving them 1, maybe 2 cards. Whereas, like say you board wipe, you put your entire, field back into your hand type of deal instead of putting it in the graveyard.
Yep.
Yeah, every time someone blows up one of your Planeswalkers, it just goes back to your hand for you to recast it, use it again.
I like that. I really like this card a lot. I wish it wasn't 7 mana. That's outrageous.
Right, that's the downside, yeah.
The other fun thing is since it is mono white, and the card only cares about it hitting the graveyard, you could run every white exile effect there is, even though a lot of them are like 4 or 5 mana. But that means you kind of one-side the effect more often.
Sure, just
throughout
exile
the game.
your opponent's stuff, and anything of yours that gets destroyed, you can get the loot back.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good pick, Max. I wrote about this card back in the day when the Planeswalker change happened, when they became legendary. Just because, like, well, maybe someone will start playing it, but, no one, I didn't make an attempt to do so either, so.
This really makes me want to try, though, just because, I didn't realize this card existed.
Which is why it's in less than 100 decks. There we go. Chris, what's your number 2 one here?
My number 2 is close to 100 decks. This card comes in 98 decks in EDH Rec, and that's Thalia Heretic Cathar. Thalia is a 3/2 with first strike for 3 mana, 2 colorless and a white. And it reads, creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. This kind of caught me off guard that there's so few decks with this. Granted, There's probably better commanders for this type of theory crafting, like your tempo break, your control, your stacks, that kind of fun jazz. But a 3-2 for 3 that just kind of slows down the game in mono white, I think is invaluable. Because mono white's not very fast. It can't do a whole lot. So you need to slow your opponents down so you can, keep up pace with the game. I believe that this card probably sees a lot more play in 1v1/CEDH. Because that seems like where it would be a lot better at. And I'm surprised because I thought that EDH Rec would still scrape and get, like CDH decks. So maybe I'm wrong with that as well. I'm not sure.
I think it sees a lot of play in those decks, but just not as the commander. It would like if someone's going to play stacks or something in that environment, they'd probably play Ground Arbiter and have this in the deck or something.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a phenomenal card. I mean, people knock on mono white, and it is very, very weak. I think it is the weakest color overall out of the color pie. But it still has a lot of upside to it. There's a lot of powerful things in white, and if you can get that tempo set where you're telling people how they need to play, then, you can just do all your fun jazz with it.
I think the problem is probably that it's one of those cards where I think you build the deck, and after a couple of games that you drug out to like 2-hour games, you're like, I don't even want to play my deck, let alone anyone else wants to play against it.
Right.
But it's a super cool commander and super powerful card for sure. Does it still sees play in Eternal formats, doesn't it? At least it did for a while.
I don't remember the last time I saw one of these. I know
it was in something. It was in a humans deck of some sort. I'm fairly sure at one point in time at least.
Yeah, because I know like in my Heliod deck for Modern, we actually swapped out cards like this for Archon of Emeria instead, because it limits the amount of spells cast in a turn, and it does the non-basic lands clause. Sure. So, and like creatures aren't like as big of a deal as everything else is. So,
and the first strike is pretty huge on a 3/2 as well.
Yes, that is huge on a 3/2. I mean, in Eternal formats, 3 power is like god tier to power. So,
yeah, very cool pick. So I have a couple here that I'm gonna lump in together because I would kind of try the same strategy with all of them. The first one is a commander that I actually have played against multiple times because our friend Dr. Mike has this as his commander, and that would be Moloku, the Clouded Mirror.
Interesting. Sounds like another Kamigawa.
Is this the illusion commander he uses?
Yeah. Moloku, the Clouded Mirror, is 5 mana for a blue for a Moonfolk Wizard, 2/4 with flying, and has 1 mana, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with flying. Our friend Dr. Mike has an illusion tribal deck, a mono blue illusion deck, and this is his commander. There's not a ton of them, but there's more than you would think. And the ability to, hey, I just missed a land drop, I'm just going to bounce this land back to my hand and then play it, and I get a free illusion. Or if you have the ability through something like, say, a Coat of Arms, and, hey, I've got 6 illusions out, I might as well, bounce 5 lands, because I've had him do this to me before. I'm going to bounce 6 lands to my hand to make 6 illusions, and that's going to be an additional 30 damage I'm swinging in with on you, and you're dead and game over. So that's when I've seen him really just like, well, I'm bouncing everything I have to my hand. Do you have a fog? Because if not, you're taking 106. So anyway, I think Moloku is a really neat commander in under 100 decks, and the way I've seen it played is an illusion tribal. You could probably do some land shenanigans too, I would imagine, with it, but there's a lot you can do, and yeah, 5 mana isn't great, but there's worse things in the world, so it's one of my picks for these kind of 3 tribal commanders I wanted to talk about. The second one here is Zuberi Golden Feather from way back in Mirage. And it is on the reserve list, but it's only like a $5 card and probably will not go up too much because it's not that good. 4 and a white for 3/3 with flying. And it says all other griffins get +1/+1. So it's a really minor lord for griffins. And griffins, you certainly must be thinking there's not many griffins in Magic, or they've been eroded to birds or something. They have not been eroded to birds. And there's a surprising amount of griffins in Magic. Every time they print a white 2/3 with flying and first strike that's a limited card, it's almost always a griffin if it isn't a bird. So there's a surprising amount of them over the years. Enough that if you wanted to do a weird mono white tribal deck, there's plenty of griffins to populate that list, and Zuberi could be your commander. 3/3 with evasion is not nothing. Buffing all your griffins is pretty useful. Yes, there's a lot of better things you could build, but if you're looking for something weird that no one around you is building, Zuberi's perfectly serviceable for a commander of a weird tribe, I think. The last commander, again, also that I would use in a tribal deck, and this is one I kind of attempted to put together 4 or 5 months ago, not to really use, but because I was doing a guest spot on the Legendary Creature podcast, and we were talking about blue. And at one point when we were like discussing doing the show, we were going to each like brew a quick deck up and talk about it. And we wound up not doing that because the show ran really long anyway. But the deck I had messed around with was trying to do a Kira Great Glass Spinner Spirit Mono Blue Spirit Tribal deck. And Kira has flying. It's 3 mana, so 2 blue and a colorless for a 2/2 with flying. Creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, counter that spell or ability. So it's, first of all, it's going to protect all of your creatures. And there's, in blue, almost every spirit has flying. So like you're playing a deck filled with evasive creatures, your commander is going to protect all of them. You have access to things like gravitational shift or favorable winds in blue. Again, you're in the tribe, so if you need win conditions, you've got your coat of arms or your door of destinies kind of things if you need to. The deck I had kind of brewed up that we wound up not using, that when I finished looking, I'm like, this is actually kind of weirdly playable, I think. You've got a ton of draw in blue. You have counter magic to solve a lot of your problems. And again, this commander's in less than 100 decks. If you wanted to build an oddball, a tribal deck in mono blue, you could do way worse than spirits under Kira Great Glass Spinner, I think. So those are the 3 I have lumped together. Moloku, the Clouded Mirror, Zuberi, and Kira Great Glass Spinner, all ways to play kind of weird tribes that don't get played a ton in mono colors. Those are all serviceable commanders, I think, and if you're looking for something weird, I would take a look at all 3 of those.
So have you guys noticed that so far, between Dana and I, we've been choosing a lot of monocolor commanders?
My next one is not monocolor commander, but yeah, I like monocolor. I think it's a fun challenge to play.
Well, I think I looked at all of them that were below 100. I spent all last night cruising through and really deciding on them. And a lot of them are monocolored commanders, or they're the partners.
Yeah, yep.
Because some of those partner iterations are not good.
Yes, but solo especially. And a lot of the mono ones also were from way back in Magic's early days when they did print a few legends. The legends tended to be monocolored outside of the legend set. After all the Mirage ones and afterwards,
yep.
Ice Age, that kind of thing. A lot of those tend to be monocolored as well and relatively weak. So yeah, there's just a lot of those mono legends from the early days that aren't that powerful, but it doesn't mean they're not interesting or useful.
Yeah, I would like to see like a challenge type of thing set up where you have to build a commander deck but the legend has to be, printed like 20 years ago or something like that.
Right.
And it has to be monocolored and has to be horrible.
So Max, what's your next one here?
Mine is a partner combination.
Oh boy.
Oh, nice.
This is Jessica, Thrice Reborn, and Tana, the Blood Sower. This is 88 decks on EDH Rec. So for those who don't know, Jessica, Thrice Reborn was from Commander Legends. It's 2 and a red for a Planeswalker. It enters the battlefield with the number of loyalty counters equal to the amount of times you've cast a commander from the command zone this game. It's 0 activated ability. You choose target creature until your next turn. If that creature would deal combat damage to one of your opponents, it deals triple that damage to that player instead. And then its -X ability is Jessica deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. And then Tana, the Blood Sower, is 2 and Gruel for a 2/2 with Trample, and when it deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Saproline creature tokens. And they both have partner, and Jessica can be your commander, because it's a Planeswalker. I'm kind of going the same route Dana took his Dramoka the Eternal deck, and kind of doing creatureless Voltron as well, but with equipment and spells, so stuff like Rancor and Blackblade Reforged. So you can essentially pump Tana up as much as you can, because it already has Trample natively, hit an opponent, and then with Jessica out, it's going to deal triple damage of whatever couldn't be blocked. And then you're going to make all those Saproline tokens, so all it's really going to take is a single, maybe, overrun effect to wipe out the entire board.
Interesting.
That's pretty beefy.
And, you can look through Scryfall, there's a lot of cheap, 1 or 2 costed equipments that equip for 1 or 2 that give +2/+0. I don't care about the defense buff in this deck. I just want as many cheap things that give me +2 or +1 as fast as possible.
That is, Tana's a really solid commander. Yeah, I like the idea of pairing with Jessica. That's really in your. I also like when people pair partners up with that, and they don't go to like 4 colors or 3 colors. They like do some overlap and keep it. I like 2 or 3 color decks, and that's a good call there, Max.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, he does have partner. Oh, I know how I'd build that deck.
Uh-oh.
How'd you build it?
I'd make it mono red, and I'd run Rogaraka.
Rugrat?
Yeah, because he's a 0 cost commander that you can partner with Jessica, and then just keep jamming him repeatedly to get all the loyalty counties on Jessica. Interesting.
Well, Chris, what's your last one here?
My last one, I saw this on the list, and I immediately had to say it because it brought back a lot of memories. And that is Dong Zhao, the Tyrant. This card is only in 23 decks on EDH Rec. Now, Dong Zhao is a 5 mana 3/3, 4 colorless and a red, for a legendary creature human soldier. And Dong Zhao's ability reads, when Dong Zhao the Tyrant enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls deals damage equal to its power to that player. We had a player that we used to play with years ago who had this as their general, and they had it built as a, like mass amounts of damage to every player, damage doublers, just really good red stuff in general. Yep. And then drop Dong Zhao when needed to just wipe a player off the board type of thing. I am extremely surprised not to see that this is more popular, just because that ability is super powerful. I mean, the way that I've seen people playing, they're dropping 7/7s, 8/8s. I mean, why not drop 5 mana to deal 8 damage to a player? I mean, that's ridiculous.
And once upon a time, I remember this card had spiked up to some ridiculous amount of money, but it's back down to $30-ish now, which is still a lot of money, but like for a card with only 1 printing and Portal, that's not necessarily crazy.
No, I think it's a really good card, and I would love to see more people play. I'm actually going to go look for one personally myself today when I go into work and get one for my collection, because I want to just Zao people.
I could totally see you playing that deck, Chris, for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to call it the Dong deck, and all I'm going to do is just like dong people in the head, just like straight up to the face damage, and be like, oh, here's another one.
You can't play that deck against small children, Chris. Just be against adults.
Yeah, can't play that deck in public.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
All right, we'll jump over here to the last one I have, Niambi, Faithful Healer.
Ooh, I love
this card. This was from one of the bad Planeswalker decks we used to get.
Yep.
Where they printed these, like, they're basically intro decks kind of for new players that you could buy in a Target or a Walmart or whatever. And they had Planeswalker face cards, but they were always like 7 mana Planeswalkers. They were a little expensive. It was to encourage them or to discourage them from seeing play in Standard. So in the deck we're talking about here, Niambi is Azoria, so this is my first pick that isn't mono, and she's a 2/2 for 3 human cleric, and her text reads, when Niambi Faithful Healer enters the battlefield, you may search your library and or graveyard for a card named Teferi Timebender and put that card into your hand. So it doesn't go into play, it just goes in your hand, but still, that's pretty decent. The reason I think this is kind of interesting is basically it kind of lets you at all times have access to that Teferi Timebender. And Teferi Timebender is 6 mana for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. His +2 is untap up to 1 target artifact or creature. -3 is you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. But he's got a -9 that's taken an extra turn after this one. And there are ways, it's not as easy as it is with the mono blue Teferi, but there's ways with the Chain Veil and stuff where you can wind up looping Teferi Timebender.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's much easier ways to take infinite extra turns, but there's not ones that are dumber, maybe. in using Niambi to get Teferi and then having to like get the Chain Veil involved, and there's some really dumb convoluted like loops you could do with this deck. I think it's just a fun, silly way to basically have kind of a secret Teferi Timebender as your commander, because you use Niambi to get him every single time. So I think as far as like weird, flavorful decks go, that's a lot of fun. You're in good colors. You're in colors that interact with Planeswalkers pretty well. You've got, removal and draw, plenty of interaction. In Azorius, plenty of control. I think you could build a relatively decent control deck using this, even if you weren't going for some convoluted loops.
Yeah.
And no one is going to people are going to be like, that's not a real card. Because, like, unless you happen to buy that goofy intro to Fairy Timebender deck, this isn't even the face card of it. You're not going to know this card exists. It's probably just one that you've never seen. And I think it would be a lot of fun to play this and to be able to flex on people after beating them with your Niambi Faithful Healer deck.
I have played this card. I played it in my Esper when we built our decks to mimic your Jeru deck. And it's actually, that Teferi is really good overall. Yeah,
gain 2 life and draw 2 cards for -3 is not nothing. And being able to untap an artifact or creature, particularly if you're running some Soul Ring, Thran Dynamo, Worn Power Stone kind of artifacts that tap for multiple mana, that's really useful too. So yeah, that's my last pick, Niambi Faithful Healer. And these are all commanders in less than 100 decks in EDH Rec. And yeah, there's more decks out there than that just aren't currently, online showing up in the list. But don't be afraid to dig down deep and like look for stuff that isn't played and see something catches your eye as well. I think that's a fun way to build a deck.
Yeah, there are lots of them out there that are just like, I looked at a lot of them, and I had like 4 other ones that I could have talked about that were just like, I'm surprised that these aren't decks type of thing. Granted, I was thinking about this, and over the years we've received more and more cards, so like a lot of them are falling off to the wayside because there's just cards that are better than them.
Yeah, you have the problem where like there's a better version of the thing that you're looking at that comes out. That's always going to hurt it. But at this point, when we're getting like 40 legends per set, and 8 sets per year, whatever it winds up being, there's just so many commanders. Like people are just going to not build them because there's just not enough decks out there. Like the amount of commanders are coming out faster than folks can build decks.
Yes.
So in 5 years, we're going to look back and there's going to be a lot of new stuff even. Or at least, new currently, it'll be 5 or 6 years old then, that'll be on that list because there's just not enough people building decks to put 100 versions of the 40th legend from Streets of New Capenna in a deck.
Right. Yeah, like a really good example of that is, and this is just recent memory, so people, this should be fresh in their memory, is Captain Lanneray Storm deals with treasure tokens. She's 2/2 for 3 with haste and all that creates treasures. Well, then they made Prosper, and Prosper just does it better type of thing. So I mean, you go that route with it instead.
They also made Old Gnawbones. He does a lot of things with treasure too, FYI.
That's
Max
green.
Has got Old Gnawbones on the brain right now.
Horrible color.
I may or may not be having a new mono green deck being built where he may or may not be the leader.
I have the extended art foil. I pulled it.
No, I don't need to pay you that much money.
I am looking forward to seeing Max's mono green Gnawbones deck.
I'm 4 cards short of 100.
Nice. Like you haven't got them yet, or you're still trying to figure out what to add?
My digital list is 4 cards short of 100.
Okay.
I hope to finish it up on the plane ride this weekend and order them while I'm at my conference.
And you'll be good to go for Vegas then.
Yes.
Nice.
It'll be its first test is right out of the gate.
Well, I do want to have one new deck for Vegas. I'm not sure if it's going to wind up being that Dramoka deck I was talking about, or if I'm going to come up with something else, but I do want to have at least one new list for Vegas for myself as well. So for sure.
I did find a card that I was going to build, and I'm trying to look it up right now, but I can't find it. It was a companion, so I don't remember what the color combination was. I think it was blue-green.
Karuga.
Is that what it is?
It's the one when it enters the battlefield, draw a card for every creature with power 3 or greater you control.
Is that what it is? Is it power?
Karuga,
I thought it was
Sage.
CMC or something. Well,
maybe it is CMC. Oh, it is CMC because I ran it as my companion for Tulane.
Yeah, something along those lines. But I remember I was discussing with Dana last week about how I wanted to play just the biggest, highest CMC deck in the world. And I saw this card and it was like, so you had to be over such of a CMC in the deck. And I'm like, oh, this will work perfect.
Talking about high CMC, I was playing last night on stream, and Joey Schultz from EDH Rec Cast was playing his Yannette deck that like flips stuff off the top of your library when Yannette attacks, and you can play that card for free.
Yep.
So he's got a ton of like expensive high CMC cards in that deck that he's trying to play for free. But he also put a protection racket in the deck, which is the new enchantment for Streets of New Capenna, where beginning of your upkeep, you reveal the top card of your library to each opponent, and they can pay life equal to the mana value to exile it. If not, you put it in your hand. That hits 3 people. And he played it, and it comes back around, and no one had removed it. And it was like 7-drop, 8-drop, 7-drop. And everyone's like, ugh. So they were all powerful cards, so like everyone took life. And they came back around again, and it's like 9 drop, 7 drop, 6 drop.
Yes.
Like, oh, come on. And I think like the fourth round came, fourth time it came around, then he hit like a 3 drop and 2 lands or something. But the first 2 times it passed around was ridiculous. It was all just like 7s and 8s and 9s. Like, man, just like half our life total was gone just from like denying him cards. So yeah, Protection Racket. It's actually kind of a well-designed card if you think about it. The problem sometimes you have with cards like that is they get super powerful sometimes the more powerful the game gets. So like that's one of the problems with Dockside. The stronger the meta is, the stronger, which tends to mean more artifacts, the stronger Dockside gets.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the opposite with Protection Racket. Because the stronger the meta gets, the lower everyone's CMC gets. So then everyone's just like, yeah, I'll pay 1 so you can't get that Source to Plowshares. I'll pay nothing so you can't get your Mox Diamond. I'll pay, like if you're playing super high powered, for the most part, it's really easy for everyone to eat those costs. When you're playing like a little more casual in Battlecruiser and people have Crawl Worms in their deck, and you're like, I don't want to take 7 to get rid of that Crawl Worm. So it's actually, I quite like how the card is designed. It scales kind of inversely with pod power. The stronger your meta is, the worse it is, and the kind of more casual your meta is, the better it gets. I like that card quite a bit. All right, I think that is going to wrap up episode 317 of Commander Central. My name's Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find them on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin McLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We'll be back next week with a new show. Until then, I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.